Okay, so this is your quiz. I'm just going to go ahead and work through it now. I know yours probably didn't look exactly like this, but it was similar. Some of you did okay, some of you not as well. So this will be kind of a test review because you're going to see this on your test, which is only a couple weeks away, right? Last week of April. Okay, so if I want to raise this guy to the fifth power, the first thing I want to do is put this in trig form, right? Trig notation. So that means I got to figure out the angle. It's just like polar coordinates. I got to find the angle and the distance from the origin. So if I go 1 in this direction and root 3 in this direction, 1, root 3, right? Then all I need to do is decide what that means. Got a right triangle here. That's root 3. This angle we should all know by now is 60 degrees. And this distance should be 2 because we should be familiar with this right triangle. You could do Pythagorean theorem to get that. So this complex number in fact, let's say call this z, and we're raising z to the fifth. So z then would be equal to 2 times the cosine of 60 degrees plus I times the sine of 60 degrees. And we're going to raise that all to the fifth power. So my answer then would be 2 to the fifth, and then we have a shortcut, right, for raising these guys. We just multiply them by 5, right? That's the beauty of using the trig form. We don't have to raise anything to powers except the value for r over here. And I just have to multiply 60 by 5. So that's easy. Cosine of 300 plus I sine of 300. And there's my answer, right? 32. Oh, I didn't realize we want this in. There's the answer. Trig are radians, so we could have done that all in radians. But 300 degrees in radians is 5 pi over 3. And that's it. So what operation did we do here? We raised to the fifth power, but the shortcuts multiply by 5, right? That would have been pi over 3 times 5 pi over 3, same thing. The only thing we raise to the power is r. So that's my answer for the first one. Okay, if we do the same thing here, division, there's a shortcut for division, right? We subtract the angles. So what I do is 1 minus I, if you want to draw the picture, that's 1 minus I, that's down here. So it'd be 1, negative 1 in the imaginary direction. Of course, this would have to be root 2. So that's the first guy. So that angle then would be 315 with a root 2. So that's, I'm going to divide root 2 times the cosine of 315. Maybe we'll use radians this time. So that should be 7 pi over 4, right? Plus I sine 7 pi over 4. And we're going to divide that by this number, 1 plus I. So that's the same triangle. It's just in quadrant 1. So that'd be pi over 4. Cosine pi over 4 plus I sine pi over 4. And then, of course, that'd be root 2. And now when I divide these two guys. I get 1. And then remember, the reason we like these trig forms is because I just subtract the angle, right? So that means it's 1 times the cosine of 7 pi over 4 minus 1 pi over 4 is 6 pi over 4. 7 pi over 4 minus 1 pi. You don't have to do it twice. It's going to be the same thing. Sine of 6 pi over 4. And of course, 6 pi over 4 is 3 pi over 2. And then the directions, we want to put it back in standard notation. So we started in standard notation. We went to trig notation. We did our shortcut, which was subtraction here. And now I'm going to go back to standard notation by evaluating these. So it's 1, the cosine of 3 pi over 2, that's right here, that's 0, plus I times the sine of 3 pi over 2, which is negative 1. Okay, so if you run the 1 through, you get 1 times 0 is 0, and then 1 times negative 1 times I is negative I, and that's where we get our negative I answer. Okay, so let's see. Next problem. Oh, so convert, I didn't ask you to show any work for this one. This one should have been straightforward. So if I want to put this guy in, so now that was complex numbers. This is a new section, polar coordinates, right? But it's kind of similar. If I go 3 in this direction and then up here 3 root 3, then I got this triangle we're familiar with. That should be a 60-degree angle. So that's 60 degrees. And if this distance is 3, this is 3 root 3, this is always, you can do Pythagorean theorem if you want, but it should always be double the shortest side. So polar coordinates, then the R value and the angle is what I need. So the answer is just 60 degrees or 6 pi over 3. And then we're going to go backwards here. If you want, you can use your formulas here because x equals r cosine theta, y equals r sine theta. Or you could approach it the same way we did by drawing a picture. 120 would be here. This is 70, right? And you can just figure it out from your picture that this is a 60-degree angle, right? So if I did it this way by drawing a picture, then I would realize that the shorter side has to be half of the longer side, or the hypotenuse rather, and then the longer side over here has to be root 3 times the shorter side. So there's my answer, back 7/2, up, back 7/2, up 7 root 3 over 2. Or you do it this way, x is 7 times the cosine of 120. Cosine of 120 is 2 pi over 3. The cosine of 60 is a half. 7 times, and we're in quadrant 2, so 7 times negative 1/2, right, which gets you to that place. And then same thing here, 7 times the sine of 120 degrees. The sine of 120 are in quadrant 2, so it's positive. That's root 3 over 2, and that gives you the 7 root 3 over 2 number. So either one of those methods will work just fine. And then my vector question. Initial speed, 85 miles per hour at an angle 45. So your vector magnitude is 85, direction is 45. So you'll know there's a reason why these 3 topics, complex numbers, polar coordinates, and vectors, are all in the same chapter. Because we have 2 different forms of them, right? It's all right triangle trig. We can attack it with trig, or we can attack it kind of the old way by just finding the x and y coordinates, right? So hopefully you're making that connection. So this one's just like the previous one, really. It's just like, here is your magnitude, here is your direction, find the x and y coordinates. So x is just 85 times the cosine of 45 degrees, and y is just 85 times the sine of 45 degrees. So my answer is 85 times root 2 over 2, and then 85 times the same thing, root 2 over 2, and you probably want to put that in a decimal form, and this should also be miles per hour, whatever the answer is in decimal form. Okay, so I hope that helped. That's a pretty big section. You can expect to see, well, that's actually a couple sections rather, but you can expect to see all those types of problems on the test.